Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this week's Ready, Set, Grow. This is part of an ongoing webinar gardening series. Today is Tree Pruning Basics with me, Marisa Thompson. And before we get started, I'd like to tell you more about Ready, Set, Grow in case you haven't joined us before. So this is our team. So these are the hosts from NMSU Cooperative Extension. And so we have myself, I'm the urban horticulture specialist, and then Sarah Moran is on our team. She's with Bernalillo County. Suzanne Cole is in Mora County. Linda Garvin in Valencia County. Amanda Skidmore is our IPM specialist based in Las Lunas with me. And John Garlish is another host that's with Bernalillo County. So this is a series that's ongoing, and we have a bunch of upcoming sessions that we're very excited about. So I'll have more information about those at the very end. So we do have a lot of people signed up for today, and we're excited to have you. And I was really happy that many of you were able to fill out a survey when you registered, and not everybody had that opportunity. I'm sorry about that, but I did find that very interesting, and I'll use some of that information in the presentation today. And I would like to ask that we really love questions, and normally if you know me, you know that I like to be interrupted with questions, but because this is pruning basics and we need to get through it in this neat hour and have time for questions at the end, I'm going to ask that you put your questions into the chat. And we do have the team members are going to be helping to gather the questions and organize them, and so then we'll answer them at the end. And I understand that if you know the answer to a question, you might want to type it into the chat, but please refrain from doing that because sometimes it helps, well, it hurts as far as distracting from the speaker information, and there can be a dialogue going on in the chat. And so we're trying to discourage that, and it's been going great so far. So thank you for participating in that way. So also we'll keep track of the questions that we can't answer today and have future lessons. And this tree pruning and fruit tree pruning, plant maintenance and pruning is very popular. And so we will have more opportunities in the future for maybe pruning basics 2, and then pruning intermediate. And then there's all kinds of special situations with different trees. So we want to be able to cover each of those in time. So again, thank you very much for joining us. And with that, I think I can get started. Oh, so yeah, we originally planned for this series to go from September to March, but it's been so fun and popular that we are now planning all the way through October. And then the idea is to keep going and continuing into the next year. Okay, tree pruning basics. This is me, Marisa Thompson, and I'm the NMSU Urban Horticulture Specialist. And so we are covering tree pruning basics. This is beginner techniques and what not to do is some of the things we're going to cover today. So I did ask, some of you were able to fill out a poll, and let's see, I need to move my screen a little. So of the poll, the question was, how many trees have you pruned before? And about half of you said either none or fewer than 15 trees. And then the other half said either between 15 to 49 or more than 50. And so it's difficult to teach a tree pruning class to this broad spectrum of experienced people. So we're really focusing on the basics today. And I appreciate that the more experienced pruners are here. And I really love it that you are also here to learn more, hopefully. But I think that we can get some more, if people who are in that category of you've pruned 15 or more trees, think about what's something that you learned the hard way. And you can either type it in the chat or you can email it to me. And so I'll put my email here in the, this is the Desert Blooms email. I want to get more information about what have we all learned in doing things the hard way. So people who have pruned more than 50 trees, I bet you have a story to tell about something you did wrong, and we'd love to hear it. So that's an invitation to participate in that way and to help us all learn from your mistakes, hopefully. Okay, so let's see, we need to get into the material. So an outline for today's talk, we're going to talk about why we prune, when to prune, how to prune, and then there's other important things to worry about. And so one thing I really love about how interested people are in pruning is that it gets us close to the tree, and that helps us to figure out some other things that might be going wrong that might be even more important than the pruning in the first place. So first of all, when we're talking about pruning trees for sustainability, we want to know why, when, and how. And so let's first get into the why. And with this, I'm also going to talk about why not to prune. So this is a tree at the NMSU Ag Science Center in Tucumcari. And this is an example to me of a tree that has been pruned very minimally. And so you can see that, and I think you can see my cursor. Maybe give me a thumbs up on your screen if you can see my cursor. Can you see it? So I'm trying to point. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Linda. So a couple of you, thank you very much. So then down here, you can see this is the base of the tree. And as it goes up, at every branching union, the tree gets smaller and smaller. The branches get smaller and smaller. And that is proven in science across different species, that ratio of the fatness of the trunk and then the skinniness of each branch, and then the skinnier and skinnier, is really important. And it's important because that means that you can get snow or a bird to land way out here on the tip and not break that branch. It's the evolutionary design of the tree to be able to handle wind, storms, and other things. And so when we prune trees, we are disrupting the integrity of this branching system. And so that's something to keep in mind, and try to prune as minimally as possible. Okay, but so why prune? You might want to prune to improve the appearance or the health of a plant. And this has changed over time because, that perfect lollipop tree that's in the cartoons, that's no longer everybody's cup of tea. And so now it's considered more natural and healthier for the tree and for the habitat for the birds in the tree to have a more natural branching structure. And so some of those trends are changing as far as appearance. Another reason is to control the size of a plant. Often trees are planted, or even shrubs, or maybe your yucca is planted too close, or your prickly pear, and so you're having to prune it back every year. And the solution there is right tree, right place, or right plant, right place. That means thinking ahead about how big this plant could get, will get, and then putting it in a position so that it doesn't have to be pruned so frequently. And to prevent personal injury or property damage, if there's some sort of problem with a branch, that's a good reason to prune. To train young plants and avoid codominant stems. This is a really big one, and this is probably the biggest that I would like to cover today. So with young plants, a lot of times they are pruned in the nursery. Have you ever seen before a tree seedling? And all it is you have a pot and you have this stick coming up, and it's just a single stick, and there's no branches on it that first year. There may be leaves on it, but there's no branching. That doesn't really look like a tree. It looks like a stick. And so often trees in the nursery are pruned for a couple different reasons, but that might be one. And so it's pruned in the nursery, and automatically the integrity of the structure was disrupted. And so that means that you may have to do some other pruning in the first few years, especially once the tree's been planted, to control and to train this young plant to get it kind of back to this natural form, and especially to avoid codominant stems. And then another reason to prune is to influence fruiting and flowering. And that has to do with fruit trees, but also with trees that we are growing just for their beautiful color. Okay, why not to prune? Well, one reason not to prune is that some recommendations change over time. And I have this example here. You may have seen these. This is a webworm, a fall webworm. And if you're not already familiar, I write a weekly gardening column, and it's called Southwest Yard and Garden. So I wrote a couple years ago about fall webworms. I'm not going to show that little video now, but it's kind of creepy. But I will ask one of my co-hosts to put just the general link to the blog in the chat so that y'all can check these out. So the point here, though, is that the advice used to be if you have fall webworms to prune that branch out, and then you're removing the webworm. But as we've gotten to know trees better and refine our recommendations, we now know that pruning injures trees, and we'll get into that in a minute, but also by just cutting with a rake or a hoe, cutting open that webworm pack, the worms fall out. It's kind of gross, but it's a way to solve the problem without pruning. So that's one reason, that's an example of something that's changed over time. Another example has to do with the aesthetic and the difference in how we used to look at trees in our urban landscapes and how we look at trees now. And so this is an example, this little simple drawing of this kind of classic tree shape. And the idea here is prune out those smaller branches so you get more of this shape here on the right. But we now know that some of those little branches inside the canopy are actually really important, and that the photosynthetic rate of the leaves out in the sun is actually lower because those leaves are really stressed in the middle of the summer. And the leaves that are underneath there that kind of make a trashy trunk, they actually are good and they're doing a lot of work. Even in the case of a fruit tree, having some of those smaller branches on the inside of the canopy can really be really beneficial to the overall tree's health. So it's just a changing dynamic of how we think about what needs to be pruned and not. Another example is, or something to think about, is that you may see recommendations for limbing up, for reducing the lower limbs so that you can walk under the tree. That's really important, especially in high traffic areas where you need bicyclists to go by or cars to go by. But in our home landscapes, it may not be as important. You could have lower branches, and that could be healthier for the overall tree. So we need to be thinking more about how to update our pruning practices as we grow. Okay, there's a lot more we can get into this, but again, we're trying to get all the information in an hour, so I'm going to keep going. So when you prune, and the answer is, unfortunately, it depends. So when to prune? It's always a good time to prune branches that are dead and branches that are diseased. And then I have an example here of a common disease that we have on fruit trees, on apples and pears. This is fire blight. And so there is a column on fire blight, and a bunch of other NMSU materials are linked in here. And this is a disease that can spread just from one cut side of the tree when you trim the branch, and then spread it over to the other side of the tree. So clean your shears between cuts, especially if you think there's a disease. And so that's really an important thing about pruning. But so you can prune, it's always okay to prune out diseased tissue, but be very careful about spreading it. And there are directions about exactly where to make that cut on the tissue. Okay, so that's for diseased. And then damaged branches. So especially when you have larger branches or smaller ones that are damaged, it's okay to take those out and go ahead and remove them, especially if they're dangerous, if they're going to hurt someone or something, it's okay to take them out. So as far as thinking about when to prune, we really need to consider, what are your goals? So for fruit production, your goals may be heavy fruit production and a really nice crop this year, which means the best time to prune may be about now, late winter, early spring, and that helps with the flush of new growth to produce a nice, strong crop. Now, you may be a person who has a fruit tree and you are not interested in getting the maximum fruit load. You're more interested in a healthier, longer living tree, and so you may not prune, or may not prune as much as far as your fruit production. And then also for reducing canopy size, so pruning of any kind helps to encourage a flush of growth. And that's because the way that the hormones, if this is your tree and your branches, and the same thing is true with your roots, the very tips here, and also the tips of the roots, have a growth hormone in them, auxin. And when you remove it, the plant signals to grow more in these other directions. So, or maybe along a bud on the same branch. So pruning helps to encourage that growth. But if you're trying to prune something to reduce the canopy size because it's getting in the way of something like your gutters and the awning of your front of your house, like this is a column that I wrote, and that's pictures of the mulberry tree and the awning at my house. And so if you're trying to remove that growth or reduce that growth in the future, then pruning midsummer is actually a little bit better because you'll have less of that grow back. And I have another picture here of the same tree, and it's kind of hard to see, but this is, maybe after one of the first frosts before the leaves dropped. I just went out to see how it had grown back. And then this morning I went back to get one more picture, and you can't quite see, so I circled them. Those are some of the branches that I pruned back in August. And so you can see that they didn't take off again, growing stronger. And so maybe it worked. I'll update this blog with this photo, and then also update later in the season. So that's just something interesting about when's the right time. So it really depends on what you're growing for. So another example is with maximizing bloom. So if it's something like a lilac shrub, you may want to hold off. It depends on the tissue and how the buds are formed. So plants that produce their flowering buds at the end of the summer, if you cut them, then you're not going to get flowers this year. So some people, maybe there's some types of climbing roses like that, and lilac's another example, and there's several others. But again, with any of these examples, as long as you're pruning the right way, pruning at the wrong time is still not gonna kill the tree, right? So that's something that I think we can relax about and try to get better about our pruning techniques, because it really does take time. For overall tree health, we recommend pruning late winter, spring, or summer, and it is considered a little bit less of a good time in late fall and in early winter, and that has to do with the plant's response to the cut, and that as the tree is going dormant in the fall and in the beginning of the winter, that's when everything shuts down, and so the healing inside of that branch, the ability to block off that wound from the inside and to grow over, is reduced at the early part of dormancy. Does that make sense? So but again, if you have to prune in December or in October, then maybe that's going to be just fine. It's maybe not optimal, but it's going to be okay. Okay, so let's go into how to prune. I love this Al Shigo quote: "People who prune the old-fashioned way should be made to go to an old-fashioned dentist." So we are learning more and more about what trees need and what they take, and changing our pruning guidelines. So generally, there should be a definite purpose when you to pruning, and that's the point, is that pruning injures trees. So every cut is an injury. It's not necessarily going to kill it, but it is stress. And especially in our climate, if your tree is already drought stressed, water stressed, maybe the roots are stressed because of restricted roots, then these little pruning injuries really do start to add up. So also that pruning affects the entire plant. So even though one branch is cut, the plant, all resources from the entire plant are drawn to go either seal the wound or to help tissues grow in that area. Following the natural growth habit, like I said, that can be hard if it's been interrupted since the tree was really little. So you can look up and pay attention to what does this tree look like in other neighborhoods? What does it look like in the forest if this tree is native here? And start pruning towards the natural habit. This is a really big one. Smaller cuts are better. And this photo, I think I still have my cursor. This photo here is showing an example of why. It's that no matter, even if you make the best cut on a big wound, I don't know, something bigger than this maybe, it's going to be really difficult for the tree to seal that wound properly. And it takes a lot of energy, and and that time that it takes is more time for decay, for infection. And so the smaller cuts are really better. Something that's smaller, I don't know, than like a little 2-inch diameter is going to be much less of a stress on the plant. So that means pruning when they're younger, because that's when the branches are smaller. Wounds don't heal, they seal, and they seal from multiple sources. So that from the inside the plant, like I was kind of describing before, as soon as a cut is made, enzymes run to that site to help to block off and to compartmentalize that wound area so that decay doesn't drop down into the trunk or go through the trunk. And also the tissue there, that collar, you can kind of see it on this picture with this white donut. See that? That is another way that the tree from the outside starts to seal. So the donut over the years gets fatter and fatter. In this case, the donut was interrupted by being nicked here down at the collar. So that's a big no-no. We'll get into that. But even if this collar wasn't nicked on a big branch, it's hard to seal that, right? It takes time and that tissue dries up before it has a chance to do its good work. Okay, using the proper tools, that's a big one. We'll get into that. Techniques, that's a big one too. Also, a general pruning guideline is that we no longer recommend wound dressing or any kind of sealer or sealant. No longer recommended. And then we did just cover timing. So timing, generally late fall, early winter tends to be the worst, but sometimes it's still necessary and it's going to be okay. Okay, what's next? The ABCDs of pruning and deciding what to cut, if anything. So start with D. Like we said, it's always okay. So go ahead, you can remove the dead branches, and it can be difficult to tell the dead branch from the living one in the winter. So you can reach out and break it and see if it breaks off easily. And if it bends a little bit, then leave it alone. You can wait until the summer and prune that off. But it's always okay to prune off dead tissue. So in this picture, you can see that lighter gray wood is that dead wood, both all the way over on the right and kind of in the center. But sometimes it's like a slightly different color, and you'll get to know it better as you get to prune. So A in the ABCDs is for apical. This means selecting and promoting a central leader from it's called the apex or the tip of the tree. So you have this classic tree shape. And so you can find this by looking at the main stem from the trunk up through the canopy, like you kind of trace it with your eyes all the way to the top. And so I have a picture here to show. So the central leader in each of these, so in the first year, here's the central leader. It's been identified. In the second year and in the third year. So in the first year, what the decision was made was to prune off some of these potentially competing stems so that the tree has a clear leader. And then in the second year, going in and cutting anything that is going to be overlapping, crossing. We'll get back to that in a minute, but still you're just encouraging that one central leader. In the third year, coming back and doing a little bit less, but doing still some of the same. It's just a little bit of cleanup on some of the smaller branches that may not be growing the right direction. But that is a nice way to get to prune in the early years of the tree and then be able to back off and maybe never prune again. That's ideal. So the central leader pruning technique. Here's an example of where you have these two stems that when they were little, they were probably just starting to compete. And so the central leader wasn't chosen. And now that the tree is a little bit bigger, you have these codominant leaders. And that means you have two branches that are about the same thickness, and they come from the same branch union at the base. And there is a couple problems with this. One is that the overall form doesn't quite work over time, and we'll see pictures of that, but it's that this union between the two is very weak. It's easy, if you were to go in and pull it, you might be able to even pull it apart. And so when we're talking about the angle of the branching structure, piece is bad and loser is good. I don't know if the screen's reversed, so loser or loser. So basically something that's more like this is a healthier union. It has to do with how the branch tissue is formed at the base of the branch here. So it's actually much more difficult to break. And that whereas a tight union, something like this or even tighter, is very, very weak. And there's another reason, we'll get back to it. Okay, so here, codominant stems. This picture, I think, shows a couple different examples. That top left image is a weak fork. That's that angle. And that picture in the top right is showing a strong fork. So it's like, it's wider. You see that? And then on the bottom, that's considering the thicknesses of these two branches. So it's more preferred to have your central leader, A, in the bottom left image, that is fatter than the branches that come off of it. And they're even recommending that the branches that come off of your central leader be half the size and diameter as the main trunk. So, or half might be optimal, but there's wiggle room there. I do want to point out this thing here. So can you see I think you can see my pointer. I'm pointing at this included bark. It's called bark inclusion. So what's happening here is that you may have had a branch that looked like this in the beginning, but as both of these were getting fatter at the same time because they're codominant and they're competing with each other, that branch union down there is really bad. And it means that as they're growing, they're pushing against each other down deep in that crevice. And so that's going to cause over time more weakness, and it can cause rot, it can cause oozing and other problems. So we'll see more examples. Let's check the time. We're doing good. All right. So here's a picture example. This is a tree that has codominant stems, and maybe they're not exactly the same size around, but they do look pretty close to me. So because both of these stems are competing for the apical dominance of the tree, they will continue to grow both of them fatter, so that over time that becomes a very weak union. And maybe when the tree is this small, it doesn't seem like that big a deal, but by the time the tree has gotten really big, or I'm not sure exactly how big it'll take to get there, then all of a sudden you've got two problems, because now you have this huge tree that's got decay and weak branches, but also remember that the smaller cuts are easier to seal. And so now if you've waited too long, you have a really big cut to make, and it's going to be really difficult for the plant to seal itself. Okay. So that apical dominance thing is not always true. And anybody who has read about or grown fruit trees knows that there are some other shapes to, there's like a Y shape, and there's also an open center. It's kind of like a bowl shape for fruit trees, especially plums and peaches and apricots. So that apical one isn't always true, but still we need to think about the branching structure and the overall shape of the tree. Okay, B is for bad, weak, hazardous, damaged, disease, structurally defective branches. We saw pictures of these, like, something that's broken. And so you can always cut those out. And again, you're going to clean your tools between each cut. And then C, excuse me, C is for competing. Those are those branches that are rubbing or growing the wrong way. They may not be competing yet, but the smaller the better. So if you see two branches, I think I have a picture here where they're okay now, but as they both get bigger, they are going to start rubbing into each other and damaging each other. And so go ahead and pick one or pick both of them and prune them out before that gets to be a problem. Now we have some pictures of this bark inclusions. So this is when you had codominant stems, and on the left you see one that's 3. So each of those branches is about the same. The huge branches are about the same. And so, like we said, as they're growing fatter, they're pushing each other apart, and that's causing this decay down in the crack there, and it starts to ooze and stink. And this was a column on a cottonwood tree up outside of Farmington, and so this is a huge tree. It's grown a very long time like that. But now they're faced with this difficult decision, because both branches are continuing to grow and push against each other. They have this real stinky slime flux pooling at the base of the branch union, and there's not much to do about that. It's some research is showing that slime flux, this bacterial organism that is growing there, and it makes it stink really bad, like fermented nail polish. That slime flux is actually potentially benefiting the tree, because the bacterial growth may be keeping fungal growth down. So there's not much that can be done to avoid it once it's there. But as a young tree, this one could have been solved by pruning out one of those codominant leaders. And now it's potentially a hazard in their backyard, so they're worried about that. I have another example. I just got this picture sent in from a Sandoval County Master Gardener, and I can't remember now if it was last night or this morning, but this is an oozing Texas redbud. And so the first thing I could see is that those examples of those branches do seem to be about the same, the bigger branches, they're about the same size. And then I can see that bark inclusion. So I'll zoom in. This is that example of bark inclusion. And so that is a problem over time, and you expect rot, and with rot, you expect some oozing. So decay and rot, and then you have some ooze. So what can be done to this? Well, I have some ideas for you. What can be done? First, let's determine which of these larger branches should be the central leader. So to do that, there's a couple different things you do, but one of them is to compare the diameter of these different branches. And it's hard to tell in this picture. You have to do it from multiple angles because it may be that that branch on the left is the same as the branch that I pointed to on the right, but it's just that off-shooting branch is making it look fatter, so I can't tell. So you want to look at it from different angles, and also consider that, what's this guy back there? It looks like it could be that there's a third branch that is, maybe all three of them are the same size. So you need to pick a leader, and if there's no, they say that if you ask 6 tree pruners, you'll get 7 answers. So it's not that there's one exact right way. From this image, I might pick that one on the left to be the central leader because it's thicker and looks like it may be healthier. But if I were to get a picture of the whole tree and see that I like this shape of the canopy better, or if you imagine if you took this one and this one out, this one's going to look really weird and be growing way over to the side. So there has to be some decision making here. And again, it's not a live or die decision, but it not doing anything does become that dramatic. I also want to point out that that third branch, see how I can't tell in this picture, but is that more bark inclusion that's going to happen at the base there? So it may be that you need to take out that fatter branch around the back. So the next question is deciding how much to cut back the other branches besides the one that you want to be your central leader. So there's different kinds of cuts. You can cut it all the way back to the base. And I don't think I have a picture, I don't have it marked in here, but in this case, you might be very careful and come in here and want to cut this one down low here. It's going to be difficult, but you could try that. And before you do that, you should cut off the extra weight by removing some weight up at the tip. And we'll get into that in a minute. But that is one option, is to prune it way back at the bottom, and that's called a thinning cut, and it thins the entire canopy. Another option is to do a heading cut where you cut back partially. So again, this picture isn't showing us the whole canopy, but instead of coming all the way back down, if you came back maybe halfway or 3/4 of the way down the branch and cut it there, it's still going to be the same thickness at the base this year, but you've interrupted that apical dominance issue, the codominance issue. And so now this stem that was left can get taller and thicker, and the one on the right is expected to stay more of the same size it is now. Does that make sense? So there's different options, and there's pros and cons to both. Again, this is an example of a couple years ago, cutting this would have been much easier because inclusion hasn't happened yet, and because the branches would be a lot smaller and easier to cut around. But here's really what I want to sneak in to any pruning talk, is that while you're here looking at the tree, what else should you be looking at? And it's a great time to really look closely at the surroundings. Is this tree planted too deep? I don't know. But if it is planted too deep, then even if you were to do the best pruning cuts you've ever could imagine and make the best decisions possible, the tree still could really suffer and eventually die. So is it planted too deep? What can be improved for tree health care? And I don't know the history here, and I don't know what's going on in the landscape, but it looks like it's going to be pretty hot with all that rock. So let's ask, how can the tree be, is the tree irrigated? Is the water able in all that gravel area to get soaked down and soak a nice big wide lateral rooting system? Should the rock maybe be pulled back and a big nice thick layer of mulch, woody mulch, wood chip mulch, bark mulch, pine straw mulch, whatever you want, to go and help the tree roots to absorb, hold more water, and also be cooler, and there's other benefits of mulch. And then also, I would think too, because I don't know what's going to happen with this red bud, even if you do make the right decision, maybe the tree is not long for this world. So what other trees can be added to this landscape, whether or not this red bud lives another 20 or 40 years? And I think there's room for a lot more, just from what I can see. So let's talk more about codominant stems. So this is a tree out at Tucumcari, and another example of codominant stems. And so there's the two I'm worried about there, that there's that peace sign, that's a big no-no, and then you have the two stems that are the same size. So ideally, either one of those would be given a heading cut and cut off completely. No, excuse me, a heading cut and cut back, or a thinning cut and cut off completely. And here's another example. This is at the Los Lones Ag Science Center, the research farm where I work. And last year we had, last 20 years, we've had a tree pruning workshop in February. So some of you that are attending may have been there, and you might remember these. You know, it's like teaching about tree pruning. It's really fun. And then we take all that outside. Those are fun workshops, and we will have them again. But the question was, what should we prune on this tree? And so I'm interested in your feedback now. If you, so I'm going to say definitely decide what to cut. But if you want to do a thinning cut and cut this branch, let me get my pointer. You're going to give me a thumbs up or thumbs down with your little doohickeys, your emojis. So if you want to cut it way down here, give me a thumbs up. And if you don't, you think maybe it should be cut somewhere else, or maybe this one, if anything other than this option, give me a thumbs down. Anybody? Oh, okay, I can see Lola, thank you. See if I can, oh, I see a bunch of thumbs up. All right, thumbs up. And there's no right answer. It's just a discussion. Yeah. Anybody else? Oh, I see some more thumbs up. Okay. So we made a decision. So we stood there. I got to learn how now to change my screen back over. Hold on a second. So we stood there as a group, and we discussed the pros and cons of cutting different parts. And we decided to do a heading cut, a reduction. And so that's what we took out. And I have another picture to show. And so I went this past weekend and took another picture of it to be able to show how it grew back. So again, we have before pruning in February 2020. And we decided to cut there. And so that's not a cut removing the entire branch. It's just pulling it back a little bit. So now this is what it looked like the other day, a year after pruning. And I'm sorry you can't see the whole canopy in the first one, but you can guess, you can imagine that the apical dominant stem that we selected, sure enough, grew like it should, and it's branching out nicely. And the older branch that was cut back, it did branch out from that point, and you can't really tell that difference in the caliper size from one year to the next, but we'll look at the pictures next year and see if this cut may have really helped to kind of keep that branch in check. And so it's like, we still want that shade, we still want the leaves, but we're gonna encourage the left branch to be our apical dominant leader. Okay, I have some more examples. This one is from my backyard. This is a bur oak in my backyard, and I took this picture just a couple hours ago. So I'm trying to think about, all right, what should I prune? And should I prune anything? And then I first am noticing these downward growing branches. You see those, and they don't look very pretty. They're kind of awkward, but they are not going to bear fruit And they are not, they may have a couple acorns, but they're not going to be like pulling down with huge peaches on them, right? This is an oak tree. And so I'm deciding to leave them, and there's a couple good reasons. So I want to paint them green so that, I'm not saying to cut those. So a couple reasons. This is one of those things about the idea of changing our aesthetic to, do we want it to limb up, or do we want to allow some of this younger growth and let the tree be more natural? Each of these lower branches is going to have a couple leaves, I'm guessing, this summer. It's not going to be a really big branch. And because these lower branches are so shaded, they're not likely to ever become so big that they're going to hit me in the face every time I walk by this part of the path. So, and also they're so tiny. I mean, they're tinier than my pinky now. So I could take them off next year, right? So this is where some of this decision making, it's like, if you're never going to come back to the tree and you need people to be able to walk underneath, okay, go ahead and take them off. But if you're really interested in letting the tree produce as many leaves and be as healthy as it can this season, and you're going to check it again next year, then leave them on. They're not hurting anything. They're likely going to be stunted anyway because of being in the shade of the canopy, and not an issue. And so I'm leaving them. But a note, you should take off the tags on your tree. I check mine all the time to be sure they're not restricting growth on the branches, but they do. Even tags like those little simple flimsy ones will hurt branch, so watch out for that. But there are some, so okay to grow on is the decision on these lower branches. But there are some of these branches, and I don't have a picture of it that good, that are getting ready to rub or starting to rub, and so I'll make decisions about taking some of those out. But while I'm here, I decided to go ahead and look at the base of the tree. And because I have such thick mulch, can't really tell if the tree is planted too deep. So I pulled back the mulch, and I'm like, I can't believe it. Do I have a tree that's planted too deep in my own yard? And this is like the thing I try to teach all the time. Guess what? It is planted too deep. And so I didn't have time before the talk today to excavate completely, but I'll do it, and I'll videotape it and post it on my blog. So yes, it's planted too deep, or soil settled so much over the last year and a half that it is now planted too deep, even if it was planted correctly at the time. And these little yellow strings, they're super fibrous and hard. They're not, it's not twine, these are roots. And so I'm holding one there, and there's another one there, and there's a big fat one there. These are roots that are called adventitious roots. Adventitious means they grow, they're not normal roots. They're growing out of a stress response from the tree being planted too deep. And so they are not advantageous. They can get to be so thick over time that they start to girdle the tree. And they're not really doing that great a job of bringing in the water for the tree. So I need to pull this back and excavate to expose the trunk flare, the root flare, where it starts, the roots start to be visible right at the where they're branching out from the trunk. So I will do that and check back in. Okay. I also asked, do you know about flush cuts? And so it looks like 47% of you said, I've never heard of flush cuts, which is great because now's the time to learn it. But then another maybe half of you said either you've heard about them before, but you could use a refresher, or yes, I understand flush cuts, why they're bad, and how to avoid them. And so that's wonderful. And we hope that all 100% of you will be able to say that next time. So flush cuts. You'll see images like this a lot in pruning books, and my recommendation is to zoom in on one section. So please just focus on this living branch example. So they're showing there, you can see A and B. That's an example of where to do a primary cut so that you're removing the extra weight off of the branch. So they're saying slice up from A, just a half inch, or Jorn Veers says that you slice up until the weight of the branch starts to pinch your pruning saw and you can't move it anymore, and that that's far enough. And then you're going to come back and cut at point B from the top. And that way, when the weight of the branch falls, it's not going to peel down so much of your bark down into the collar. But this whole point is the flush cut problem is really focused on the branch collar. So the collar is pointed to, it's this kind of chubby section at the base of the branch, and point C to D is the recommended cut. and C to X is the bad cut. That's the flush cut. So flush cuts, if you Google them, this is what they look like. It's called flush because it's flush against the edge of the tree. And I get why it makes you think that it looks good, is because you can walk around the tree like at night and you don't see that bump, but the bump is really important. You should leave some of the tissue on. So we can't get into all of the physiology and the anatomy of the tree today, but basically it has to do with how the tree grows. And you see this is a cambium layer. That's a magic layer that grows each year a little bit thicker. It grows a new layer of a new ring of xylem on the inside and a new thin layer of inner bark on the outside. So if you ever were to scratch a branch and see that it's green underneath, that's that cambium showing through. Here's another picture. The green here is this cambium layer. It's important because that's where the growth is happening. So remember that white donut? That's where that donut forms that is eventually going to be able to seal that wound. So you don't want to leave a stub, right? That's no good. You get some dye back there, but a little bit of a stub, if you can come back in a couple of years and cut down back to leave the collar, is better than a flush cut. Here's the picture. So here we have two options. Do you want to cut at 0.1 or cut at 0.2? So you can see the branch collar is that kind of chubbier region. You're imagining what it looks like. It's kind of like if you have short sleeve shirt on, you roll up your sleeve, then that is your branch collar. You don't want to nick it. So here we're not going to cut at 2, we're going to cut at 1. Here's some more examples. Don't cut at 2, cut at 1. Okay, so you're leaving that branch collar and you're allowing the tree to grow back. So then again, here's this 1, 2, 3 method. This is showing that you're cutting up first, and then you're coming down from the top in 0.2, and then you're able to come back and make a cleaner cut for that, to leave that branch collar intact. But the problem is that you will rip. It will rip if you don't take off that extra weight, or if you're not able to hold it. If it's a smaller branch, then sure, hold it, or ask somebody else to hold it as you're cutting. But if they let go and it rips, that's bad news, because you just interrupted that donut. Is that collar is no longer going to be able to do its job. So it is hard to find good examples of pruning cuts, and that's partly because the good ones disappear over time. So they just kind of, as the trunk grows, they just fade away and fade into the tissue. So this is an example of a good cut that was able to seal, and so in a few years it won't be visible. This is an example of a donut that is trying to seal, and it's doing a good job. And so maybe if I went back and checked, it would be fully sealed now a couple years later. Here's an example of where it wants to seal, but it was a bigger wound, and it looks like the collar was nicked at the top there, so it may not have had a chance. An example here of a good cut and a bad cut. So the bad cut didn't allow for that sealing to happen, and the good cut did. So again, the right time of the year may allow for that pruning wound to happen at the correct time. Let's do your tool rules real quick. So if you're struggling and you're using your hand pruners and they're brand new, you know they're sharp, and you can't get them to make the cut, and you're using 2 hands, that's because you're using the wrong tool. You need to move up a grade. So these hand pruners are for making cuts up to 3/4 of an inch, maybe not quite that big even. So then you move up to something like a lopper. But again, if this is 2 inches, a maximum diameter branch. If you're using the lopper and you're trying to use your hip to pull the other handle down, stop, wrong tool. It's time to move into some sort of pruning saw realm. And then pole saws are great for reaching things way up high. And then head shears should only be used for the very teensy tiny little branches, and that's what they are used for, shearing things into shape. Sorry, I'm going so fast, but here's what we covered. Recap. You want to prune for deliberate health. Watch out, because recommendations change over time. Remember why not to prune. When to prune, it really depends on what you're growing for. How to prune. So we want to pay attention to codominant stems, because they're bad news. And then when it comes to branch angles, peace signs are bad and loser signs are good. Ripped bark is bad, so use that 3-step method with the upcut first. Use your proper tools. And then there's all kinds of more important things: irrigation and depth of the watering, the large area that you're watering, protecting the trunks from winter sun scald. That's something that we need to have a whole bunch more classes on. Fruit thinning is extremely important for fruit trees. Mulching, how you plant, and then I'm a big, I have problems with staking trees, and so I call it misstaking. There's all kinds of resources for you, and so when we post this video today on the blog, we're also going to post resources, and I have a whole sheet with links to all different kinds of more great information. So that's my presentation today. My name's Marisa. All of these slides are going to be available online in just a little bit of time, so you can go back to the same place you went to register. That's that Ready, Set, Grow website. And we've been talking about this the last couple months, but after today, we are going to pick winners for these prizes, and we're picking them based on the registration list. So you're already in the bag to win potentially, and we will let winners know at the next session, which is Spring Veggie Garden with John Garlish. This one is a little bit tentative. We might have to change the date, so please stay tuned. But we have a bunch of new topics coming up April through September, and so we welcome your participation. Thank you. I think, let's see. All right, 8 minutes. Speed questions. And while the questions are coming in, yeah, go ahead, Linda.
Marisa, I can monitor. I have some questions for you that I couldn't answer. One of them was, does bark inclusion happen with branches other than those on the central leaders or the central stems?
Yeah, so I'm imagining a tree. Let's go back to a picture. Let's see. Tree branch. What do we got here? Of course not. Hold on. Well, maybe I'm not going to find one. So this type of thing. So yeah. So you may have a branch that's like this. That's not your central leader. It's a secondary or even a tertiary branch. And if they're growing too tight like that, and they both are growing at the same rate, that same thing where they're the same size, then I can see how inclusion can happen. It does tend to happen more on that central leader, and it has to do with the signals that the plant is giving to which ones should grow. So I'm going to say maybe.
Okay, so several people had noted that PNM workers should get this training from you.
Okay, thank you. I will be happy to offer. That sounds fun.
Okay.
But another thing is that remember that in cases like a whole city that has 1 million trees that need to be pruned, and we have terrible resources for the staff, they may have to be doing the pruning really quickly and also making decisions very quickly, and also pruning in the time of the year that's not recommended. So these are recommendations for your tree in your backyard, and sometimes they don't always apply to everyone.
Okay, another one. This is a great slide for this question. They're asking, I tried to explain, but it's hard to explain. How do you actually identify the outside rim of the collar?
Yeah, I know. It is hard, and I don't have there's not one perfect answer. I have heard this. I've heard Jorn Veers, and Jorn is now a tree consultant in Albuquerque with Root to Shoot Root to Shoot consulting company, and so his response was, we don't know exactly. Sometimes some species don't have as thick of a collar, and so you can't really see that bulging spot. But again, imagine that you have this t-shirt rolled up, and you're going to cut out far enough that you're not cutting the rim of your t-shirt. Now, the good thing about that is that you can, if you cut out a little bit too far, out too far. So let me see my finger. If instead you came out and made your cut here, and it's a tree in your yard, next year, if you go back and see that it's not sealing over, you left too much of a stub, you can go back in and carefully shave off 1 inch or 1/2 inch and get closer so that the tree can seal that wound. But yeah, it is difficult. And that's one reason that we have a lot of problems with flush cutting. Mhm.
Okay. This question, and also, excuse me, had other questions about this. When pruning roses, I was taught years ago to seal the cut with Elmer's glue. Do you know if this is still recommended or if this no longer is a good idea? And also I had several questions about, do you seal the cut? So
Yeah, thank you. So my understanding for roses is that the reason for the Elmer's glue is this one pest, and I think it's a bee that I'm sorry, I'm forgetting now, but that wants to bore down in there. That is the one reason in roses, and I don't know if that's really a problem in New Mexico roses or if it's something that we're not that worried about. But that is why that rule exists. It's not about decay. It's not about fungal pathogen, that kind of thing. And so I think, Linda, were you going to go on with why not to use a sealer?
mhm, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that I didn't only heard the first part, but I can guess that second
Yes,
part.
right.
Yeah. So the problem with sealers, a couple things. One is that, I mean, the reality is that bacterial organisms and fungal viral organisms are around us all the time, and they are, and that the majority of them, the vast majority of them, are healthy and good and not a problem. So the idea that you're going to put on a sealer so fast that you're sealing out a pathogen is just not accurate. There's no, you didn't do that. These pathogens with the beneficials are all around us. So that's just not necessary. But there's another problem, and that is that a lot of those pruning sealers are black. And so then in our hot sun, you're just making a nice hot spot for the tree constantly. So that can be a problem. So that's not recommended. So in other climates, pruning sealers have shown to actually cause a negative effect because you get like this decay buildup underneath there. You can have mold grow, that kind of stuff. So that's where pruning sealers can be that bad. I don't know that those negative effects are as true in New Mexico, but we don't need them, and the tree doesn't need them. And like we said, the tree seals both inside the wood and with the outside, and so the sealant itself is not doing its work.
Right. Someone said they're brand new they just found out about the series, so they're asking about where they can find recordings for the series.
Yeah, let's put the link in
I just found it, so I'm gonna paste it in there. There we go.
So
Okay.
Welcome. The
Let's
older
see.
series, so like the episode from a few weeks ago with Dr. Skidmore, the link to that video is now, if you scroll down, you can see the previous ones. We are going to have to move them to their own website eventually, but for now, they're all on that one site. And so the older webinars are listed there as recordings.
Okay, so this is not necessarily pruning, but it's a good thing to talk about, Marisa. It's are those weed barriers, rings, mats sold in stores that cover the area close to the tree good or bad for trees?
Yeah, I know that is a good one. Okay, so before we answer that question, will somebody please put the survey link? So these surveys are really important to us because we like to brag about the program. We want to know that you're getting something out of it. And you can even go beyond that. And if you go out and make some pruning cuts, take some pictures, send them to my email at nm.blooms. I can use that material when we apply for grants. We applied for a grant so that we'll be able to offer these sessions all in Spanish and also have a better website and better recording. So I think that y'all don't maybe understand how much these surveys really mean to us at the university. So thank you for doing that. But also back to weed fabric. Yeah. So the question is, weed fabric that is designed to go right up against the base of the tree. To me, it matters a couple things. One, can water get through it really easily? And if not, then don't ever use it. The problem there is that, like most things, there's a spectrum. It's not just a black and white answer. It's like either you have something that is so impervious to weeds that water won't go through it, and that's terrible, or you have something that is so pervious to weeds that water goes straight through, but also the weeds go straight through. So the newer methods with landscapers in Albuquerque and across the landscaping world are not using weed fabric anymore. It's considered to be a harmful barrier to oxygen flow and to water getting in, and a thicker layer of mulch is going to be a better, longer term weed control method. So that's what I recommend.
Okay, so it's 4 o'clock, Marisa. So
Yeah.
we'll have the chat saved. So if your question didn't get answered, we can send it on to Marisa and she can answer those questions that didn't get addressed in the presentation.
Great, thank you. Thank you. And thanks so much for caring about your trees. If you have young trees, then get out there and look at them. And if you don't know, contact your county extension agent, email me, and I'll contact your county extension agent too, and loop them in, and we can help you try to make some of these decisions. On bigger, older trees, we're going to have another whole class about those too, because that's another issue. Okay. Thanks so much for your participation, and we'll see you in a few weeks for spring gardening.